Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Kevin Koym of Tech Ranch. Kevin, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Hall. Thank you for this opportunity. It's great to be talking to you today.
Yeah, it's good to catch up. So what was your background before working with early stage companies? What led you to start working in this area?
Yeah, so I am a long-term Austinite, went to college here, got the engineering degree, and straight out of college worked for Steve Jobs at a company called Next. I totally fell in love with technology startups, got this awesome opportunity being a Texas-based engineer to then actually get to join Next in the early stages of that company. This is after Steve got fired and left Apple and started another company. And that was quite literally my first job out of college. I ended up, after working there for about 3.5 years, ended up launching my first company, which built a bunch of skunkworks, disruptive innovation for larger companies. Like, as an example, one of my claims to fame is the first $2 billion worth of computers sold at Dell.com was sold on software that I started in my living room. Built a bunch of different skunkworks, did that for many years. Some startups as well. I've built 7 different startups. I'm kind of the guy that have around that would get the first $500,000 to $1 million worth of revenue involved before replacing myself with other parts of the team. But then in 2003, I had a personal tragedy. One of my friends took her own life, and I kind of was reevaluating what I would do with my life. That's when I actually started the company, or the first company behind Tech Ranch. And I said, I kind of jokingly say, but there's some truth to it. I went snowboarding, and I say, while I was on the mountain, I said, the way I'm going to solve all the world's problems is through entrepreneurship. And it won't be me building all those companies, but I'll help the entrepreneurs that are building those companies. And so we've gone off over the years, now worked with more than 6,500 entrepreneurs from 42 countries, in country in 19 different countries at this point. Our mission really is to help discover the talent that are solving these problems, develop their business, connect their businesses to opportunity, and help them scale. And keeps me busy. We're working, obviously I love Austin, Texas, like I think you do as well. But like we were saying earlier, I was in 12 other countries this last year and working with entrepreneurs around the world to solve problems around the world.
Well, that's great. So we have a lot of investors who listen to this program, and I always ask everybody who comes on, you see a lot of startups, you see what people do, see what's successful, what's not. For investors who are just starting to invest in early stage, what's your advice for them? What should they look for in a startup before they invest?
You know, there's 2 things that immediately come to mind. The first one is I probably spend more time on ensuring that the entrepreneur, him or herself, and that early team, especially the first 5 to 10 people, but especially the first 5, I don't think enough time is spent on really helping these individuals make themselves really resilient. And what I mean by that is the emotional resilience. And I don't mean just tough guy kind of things, but making sure that they really have figured out how to take care of themselves through the process. I say this as, a battle-scarred or battle-hardened entrepreneur myself, in that a lot of times these early-stage entrepreneurs, there's a lot of opportunity, and especially in emerging technologies that we typically are getting to touch. But if the individual hasn't spent any time on him or herself, there's going to end up being corners that got cut. And I think that ends up being where we see some of the messiness, especially the ethical messiness that happens at times. And so I probably have more concern than the average investor around that. And, part of it is just because as we've been working in the impact innovation space, there's a lot of opportunities around the world to open up markets for these individuals, but we just have to make sure that they've been well prepared for that. The second thing is just straight out of lean startup, really making sure there's some discipline and rigor around going through the steps of product market fit and then, problem solution fit and product market fit. What I mean by that is most times, since most of my career was spent in the emerging technology space, where there was technology that I was picking up off the workbenches at a university and then moving forward with that. I've got several examples of how I've done that in the past, both as an individual as well as supporting entrepreneurs. I think the problem that I see, and one of the big diagnostics that we typically do, is there's confusion in the technology adoption lifecycle between early adopters and early majority customers. The key thing being early adopters are so desperate for the technology that the entrepreneur has that they'll do almost anything, including dealing with technology that might not be as stable as we'd want it to be. Versus the early majority customers can't take that risk, at all. They will make a decision early to engage with the technology, but they can't take any risk. In the example I gave earlier about my career, on my personal career, in the banking situation, obviously most stuff in a bank has to be rock solid, but in the part of the bank we were working in, the opportunity in front of the bank was so massive that they engaged our database technology really, really, really early. Because they were able to do that, they were able to take advantage of an opportunity that saved them about $16 million the year after they made that $250,000 investment with us. Early adopters versus early majority customers, being very rigorous about that is probably the second thing I'd say.
Well, that's good advice. Well, you've been dealing with a lot of startups, both here and abroad. And so you see a lot of startups around the world. How do you see that the state of the startup industry evolving? Where is it going? And what do you see coming up as new changes in that area?
What's really different that I got to see, because working for a Steve Jobs startup in the Bay Area, everything only happened in the Bay Area back in that time. Then there's a couple other hotspots around the world. Obviously now with Austin has emerged as Forbes just said, the most entrepreneurial city in the world. We see now, because of all the different places I've been in the last, even just last year alone, entrepreneurship's not just something, or technology entrepreneurship and really advanced technology entrepreneurship is now not just happening in the Bay Area and New York and Seattle and Austin, Texas. It's actually happening in other parts of the world. We're seeing really great technology emerging. This last year, I was in Oslo, Norway, and you'd see different things there. I was in the Baltics 3 times, 2 of those times in Vilnius, Lithuania, and some of the cryptocurrency and blockchain-based businesses that are emerging out of there, very, very, very advanced. Whereas X number of years ago, or a decade or 2 ago, you just wouldn't see that outside of the Bay Area. You certainly wouldn't see it in Austin, but now it's getting distributed around the world. Entrepreneurship, or this type of technology entrepreneurship, is not just something localized to, say, Silicon Valley and Austin and Seattle and New York. It's now happening around the world. And I think that that's a big shift. The cost of getting startups off the ground has gone down. Governments around the world recognize that they want to get into this game, and it's shifted. And I think now, speaking to the investors that are listening, the thing that's interesting about this is it might be that the investment opportunity you're looking for is not just down the street, but might be on some other part of the world, depending on what you're looking for in your thesis.
Well, that's a good point. Investors today have a much more narrow investment focus than they used to. It used to be general investors doing general deals in the backyard. And today they walk in with very specific things they're looking for. And so they have to go further afield, not just in your city or state, but across the country and, to your point, across the world.
Yeah, exactly. And like in the case of some of the businesses that we worked with, as an example, I had a number of entrepreneurs that I actually had a number of investors that came from Sweden, as an example. A couple months ago, we had 12 investors come from Sweden that were looking for very specific impact-related investments, but not kind of the soft impact type of investments, but technology. I guess because we work in the impact area, like where individuals are saying, we want to go solve our problem with our money. We're not going to do this charitable. They're taking some of the money that they might have put into a charitable contribution, and they're putting it into investments that they have an expected return around. So typically I see investors that will invest their money around specific issues that will go much farther than their brethren of the past, or at least the the normal models of the past, where it's like, hey, we're only going to invest within 100 miles of our location. And it's more, like you said, the general investment. They're now looking much more specific around, okay, we're going to go target this one issue and get the best of the best technology, whether it's from Vilnius, Lithuania, or Abuja, Nigeria, or Austin, Texas, or something like that.
Well, that's great. Well, you see a lot of startups in there trying to grow their business and to take it to the next level. What do you see as the next step for them as far as trying to get better product market fit or better connection to the customer?
Part of what we're doing, so this Friday, we're launching a program with the Italian government, and we just launched a program with the federal government of Mexico, where part of what's happening is in each one of these locations. I mean, I think the whole world now knows that if they want to drive GNP growth, if they want to drive true wealth creation and job creation, they need to support their entrepreneurs. And so I guess the thing that I might see that some of the other speakers you probably have had might not have seen is the engagement around these organizations. Like, governments typically weren't necessarily kind to startups and entrepreneurs in the past. They would have concessions for large organizations and kind of the economic development models in the past. But what's interesting is that some of your investors could look for opportunities where they might invest $1, but it gets matched from, like, I've seen all the way up to $1 matched by 6 with one of these other organizations. In the case of the programs I just mentioned around Italy and around Mexico, the Mexican program was great because not only are we finding these Mexican entrepreneurs opportunities both in the US market and other places, but we're also able to tap into wealth in that country, in Mexico, that wants to invest in more of the US standard. And they haven't historically had that ability. And so we're able to create vehicles for them that way. It's a different way of thinking, but I think it is emerging. And I think some of your investors would be interested in knowing that this is a shift that's happened, just because it could be that as a US-based angel investor, you're able to tap into technology that the corporation will be opened up in the United States that has control of the technology. The team might have originally been from, as an example, there's a guy that we're working with from Monterrey, Mexico, or a team that we're working with from Monterrey, Mexico. And so a lot of the ownership protections that we have here in the US are moved here. But then you actually get secondary support from the governments and secondary support from other investors from, in this case, Mexico, that want to co-invest alongside of your investors. And I think that's an interesting opportunity because it's a force multiplier. There's a little bit of perceived risk on working with maybe a team from outside of the country, but then there's a force multiplier that opens up because you have other people involved, that because of the kind of the history of where things came from.
Well, that's very interesting. Investors, especially angel investors, used to be wanting the best local deal they could find. Today, they want the best in class deal they can find. So local goes away, and now it's just what's the best fintech or medical device or other deal that they're looking for, wherever it happens to be, and however it's supported, that's fine. They're just looking for the best one that they can get a hold of. But you see a lot of startups out there. What are the challenges they face today in launching their business compared to, say, 10 years ago?
That last little part cut out, but I think you said, what are the challenges that they see today versus a few years ago?
That's right. It used to be if somebody had a piece of technology, boom, would that technology work? And that seemed to be the big challenge I saw. And today it seems like they're building a website, they're putting a piece of software up, and the chance that they'll get that software up is pretty good. We think they're going to do it. The real question is somebody going to use it? Can they get people to adopt and use it?
I do think you're pointing at something that's really critical, in that in the past, probably even when I started my first company, it was like build a mousetrap and somehow you could just be successful. There's so much more talent now out there that I think that there has to be a lot more discipline about product market fit than there has been in the past. And especially since we work with people, with teams that have already developed problem solution fit and product market fit in some home country, but then they're going to a whole different place. Having the discipline to recognize that product market fit in one market doesn't necessarily mean when you cross a geographical boundary that you're going to have product market fit in the new region or the new area or the new country. I think that the key thing is it takes a lot more discipline now than it did in the past to really be rigorous about that. It used to be you could get a couple engineers in a room, and there's still opportunities like this. Get a couple engineers in a room and you build something interesting. But now, really, there's much more rigor needed on the marketing side. And not just marketing, outbound marketing. I'm talking about the discipline to really make sure that there's a true product market fit that's going to allow the entity to scale. And I think that level of discipline required has gone way up.
Well, that's great. Well, if you had to pick a couple of sectors or applications out there that you think are really great opportunities, what would you choose, or what would you think are 2 or 3 applications that are really ripe for innovation today?
I think the thing that's happening is reimagining. I'm going to give you something that's a little bit radical that we're working on. A lot of the accelerators and incubators and portfolios out there are focused around verticals. They're focused around, say, IoT or AI or something like that. And it's great to have domain expertise in each one of those fields. Because I'm a product of Austin's entrepreneurial past, where Austin has never been dominant in any one area, but the thing I think that Austin entrepreneurs figured out, since we didn't have a dominance area, was we typically were doing things that were created from cross products of other markets. The market, in-depth market leader was someplace else, but we were able to combine health and wellness or health and education or some kind of cross product. Like right now, there's some really interesting stuff happening between AI and health. And the biggest companies in AI might be someplace else. The biggest companies in health might be somewhere else. But some of the most interesting cross products are actually happening here because of having kind of a different way of thinking. I think that that's the most interesting. The provocative example that I was going to mention is right now, since I've been so focused on Mexico over my career, I'm really concerned with business between Texas and Mexico more than probably anything else, just because all Texans know that a strong Mexico is good for a strong Texas and vice versa, because we're our number one trading partners. So we've been looking at how we could actually reimagine and create cross products on how to solve some of the migration crisis and reimagining a different kind of value chain. So instead of just having like a bunch of health startups, portfolio health startups, as an example, and this is not the only type of example of this that I can give, but because of its relevant and there is money being spent on this, a good example is to really think about how do you consider a set of problems like migration as a value chain that you can interact with at multiple points. Let me give you an example. You have a group of people that perhaps you can create businesses in place, like in Guatemala or one of the other countries that a lot of the migration is coming from in the States. Or on the other side of the world, we're working with a group that's based out of Turkey. And, it's like there's a bunch of migration that's happening around there as well. So let's help create businesses that create stability in place. Okay, if that doesn't work, then there's a healthcare crisis that might be happening. Like as soon as someone has been vulnerable because they had to leave their homes, there's a different kind of healthcare than you would have if you're going deep in like a healthcare incubator. There's a different kind of need that's there. There's a different kind of job training that's there than you would have if you had the general job training kind of thing you might have localized to someplace else. There's a different kind of language acquisition process. There's a different kind of mental health need that's there. And if you can line up that value chain in a way that looks similar to guys like me as the entrepreneur that built businesses at the cross product, because I'm a product of Austin, Texas, you can do stuff that really opens up markets that haven't been thought about at all before. I've always been a fan of emerging markets. That's where I've spent the 97% of my career as an entrepreneur, always doing the new thing. And this is a new way of looking for opportunity, that instead of going really heavily deep on AI or IoT or stuff like that, looking at the new value chains that are created. Now, what we're doing in this example is we're lining up companies, startups, and scale ups around that need. And everything, one of the companies that we're working with is a new protein source that's very low cost and very highly nutritious. And if you have populations that are at risk and you want to see that they're well fed, but inexpensively fed, one of the protein sources that we have is one of our startups is a good example of that. It kind of gives you a taste of a different way of thinking about how I am thinking about this and how we're actually creating opportunities among the startups that we have access to.
Well, that sounds great. It's not just technology, but it's people and it's supply chains, logistics and culture and all the other things that go in with making a great company and a great solution. In the last few minutes that we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
The main thing is that it's an interesting time. It is an interesting time in impact investing. I think the thing that's interesting is that we have more people looking at how they can, whether we walk into a bear market or a boom, whether things boom or bust in the coming years. One thing that actually would remind everybody about is human need always has a market. There's always going to be a market. There's a lot of crises that are happening and things that are emerging in the world. And one of the great reasons to have investors look into that is I think that now, it used to be then 16 years ago when I was talking about changing the world through helping entrepreneurs that are solving these type of world problems, people kind of treated me like I'm trying to figure out a fun way of saying it. Like, there's like, that's a really good hippie idea. Someone actually said to me one time. And I don't really consider myself to come from that background. And whereas now, I think the thing that I want to point to is human need is always a good market. We walk into a bear market, like if we have the downturn, people still got to figure out how to eat. People still have to figure out how to take care of their health. People really still there's basic security needs and stuff like that. I don't really think that we need a whole lot more of apps where kids are finding their friends in a bar. And there's nothing wrong with those kind of apps. Some of the stuff I did in my early career looks exactly like that sort of stuff. But the thing that I guess, now that I got a few years on me, the thing that I'd like to just say to investors is be open to the idea that some of these impact areas really have some good opportunity in them for what might be possible with your investments. And as I gave an example earlier about the migration value chain, there's ways of really doing this in a way that solves real problems and does it in a business way where, it's like you're actually serving, but also you're building a good business around it. I think that's interesting. I think that that's really interesting. The third thing is, given that I grew up as a tech entrepreneur and I never was really a big fan of government, I've never really identified with that, just like independent. I think that a lot of times I had stayed away from things that touched the government. Now, I'm not saying that we're spending a lot of time with government, but it is interesting that I think some of the solutions are, how do we solve these impact areas, make a good business doing it, and work with the organizations like the governments, whatever it might be, whether the local, state, or federal, to do that. I think there's a new set of opportunities emerging that haven't been there before because it's a coalescence of what we have available to us these days that even just a few years ago, you couldn't have the same level of impact on, and you couldn't get the same type of return. And you certainly couldn't get the right type of receptivity from the governments in the past. I think that that's now shifted in a very significant way.
Well, that's very insightful. So how best for the listener to get back in touch with you?
There's a couple different things. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. My name is Kevin Koym, Koym. And so just look for me there. Also, Twitter ID is just Koym, Koym. It's usually easiest for me, since I am dyslexic, I would give them my email, but a lot of times if there's a way of coming inbound, going to techranch.com and there's a contact form on there. Then the most right menu position, it just says contact us or join us. you might go to that as well and say, hey, I'd like to hear more about any part of what I've said. Because I'm dyslexic, I tend to like to work with my team as much as possible on engaging with other people, because a lot of times I don't get emails as fast as some people might expect, especially with the travel schedule. But definitely interested in engaging with your community, Paul. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak today and share kind of our insight and kind of where we see things going in the world. And so love to engage with your community. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for joining us, Kevin, and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
I look forward to it. Hey, thanks, Hall. And thanks for what you've done for both Austin and for Texas, and your commitment to entrepreneurs for the long term and supporting them, connecting them to investors. I greatly appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much.
Take care.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.